Sounds to me like blackmail.
You're damn right it is, because, Jet, you are black and you are male.
Hooray!
So, we're finally here. We've all had some time to gestate with the recently released live-action Netflix version of Cowboy Bebop, and it's safe to say Netflix can't keep getting away with this. Seriously, Cowboy Bebop has become another victim in the long line of Netflix just completely destroying adaptations. Now, one of the first things to note when discussing an adaptation is that it is an adaptation, so comparing it to the original is kind of inherently something that is going to happen, but something that we should breeze past a little bit. So before we talk about what it gets wrong with the anime, and boy does it get a lot of stuff wrong, we're just going to talk about what it is as a show in itself first. We'll start by talking about what is good about it, and before everyone starts attacking me in the comments and all that, not that any of you are watching anyway, there is some good to be found in this show. I mean, it's got a huge budget, it's created by one of the biggest companies in the world, and some great people are attached to it, so there's gonna be good. So the first good thing to note about this show is that it does have a great soundtrack. Now that should come as a surprise to no one, because Yoko Kanno, the person who was responsible for scoring the original show, is back. No big surprises here that typical jazzy and quirky music was pretty good. Like, I'll probably end up downloading it on Spotify. Alongside that, it is a beautiful show. Some of the visual effects are actual Hollywood level caliber looks. Now that doesn't translate in everything, but regarding just the amount of work that was poured into those visual effects, it's clear that there's some very talented people were working on it. Also, the fight choreography is fantastic. I mean, it gets dull after a while as things begin to spiral downward, but overall, the fights are very, very well choreographed. They look very exciting. Other than that, there's a lot wrong with this show. Yep, and I'm pretty sure that's why you're here, so yeah, no surprises here. So the first grievance to pick up with this show, as you can probably tell from that little meme I made earlier, is that the writing is just bad. So besides from the over-reliance on really poorly written jokes, you know, I never needed to see Spike and Jet spending a lot of time talking about bidets in a diner. The dialogue and the general narratives and story tones are just so poorly constructed and tonally mismatched. You'll go from 1 second seeing a really, really grisly and gross image to like the crew of the Bebop just gagging around and joking. It ends up being really, really messy as the show is just jumping from one thing to another and not executing either of them well. Besides from that, it has no faith in you. This will be the first comparison to the original show, and we'll get more into a side-by-side comparison later, but the original really didn't care about over-explaining things. You were there along the ride for the journey, and you were just expected to get along with it. But in this one, it's just, there's no subtlety. Everything gets explained to you. It's as if Netflix doesn't trust you to be able to follow basic story principles. So that's really, really frustrating. Also, the visuals start off as very compelling, as I've already stated, but it starts to get awkward quite soon into it. You see, there's a little bit too much realism in this, and I understand that, you know, you can't actually shoot in space, but when I'm seeing Jet turn up to see his daughter for the first time in years, and I'm distracted by the fact that here's this giant man with a robotic arm, which is clearly made of rubber, by the way, you didn't trick anyone with that one, stood in, like, a completely normal, suburban, arguably middle-class household. It just looks ridiculous. And that ends up happening quite a lot throughout the show. You'll just see these normal, regular locales with no hint of science fiction to them. And while I understand that the original show itself kind of prided itself on this gritty realism, it also still felt otherworldly because the visuals looked gritty and grimy. Whereas in this one, It's your typical Netflix schlock. It looks shiny, it looks glossy, it looks... Well, you know, the original show is a space western. This is a lot more space than it is western. And then eventually, along the line, it just kind of ends up looking like a typical crime drama. Okay, and now that we've talked about the show, you know, as a thing on its own with only a little bit of comparison, maybe a little more than I was expecting, it's time to actually full-on compare the original and this remake. Because reproducing an anime, especially something as beloved as Cowboy Bebop, is just inherently going to come with comparison. I understand that this is an adaptation, it's a property in itself, and I respect it for genuinely trying to do something different. You know, the original Cowboy Bebop is essentially this episodic show where plot holes and overarching narratives aren't necessarily the concern, it's about the experience. Whereas this one really does try to piece together a long-form story. But it doesn't do well. It doesn't do it well, and it ruins the original subtlety and intent of the anime by doing so. Before we get onto that, the first thing that needs to be talked about are the characters. Now, this might be a controversial take. I liked John Cho as Spike. Yeah, admittedly, he's older. He is older. He's pushing 50, and fair enough, that is a little bit old for Spike, but I think he does a really good job. He has fun with it. You can tell that he's enjoying himself, and he comes across with this snarky and roguelike qualities of the character. The writing doesn't do him any favours, but I think he clearly does something right. Now, Mustafa Shakir, I think Jet was one of the characters that was written okay. I liked the addition of a daughter. Maybe not everyone did, but I think it was a nice way to give him a little bit more motivation in the story. And I think Mustafa did a pretty good job, but he did look bored a lot of the time. And I found it a little bit hard to invest. Overall, he does a okay job, but just is lacking that sense of passion that the original Jet character had. Now it's time to talk about Faye. Now this actor, Daniela Pidea, she does a good job with creating a quirky and fun and kind of unpredictable character. It's just that character isn't Faye. Like, that's not Faye Valentine. That is someone else. It doesn't make any sense to me. The subtlety and the intricacy of the character is just completely blown away and replaced with this kind of, I want to argue, fan-servicey, very, very typical character that you would expect from a Netflix adaptation. Part of what makes Faye's journey in the original show so compelling is that you also really just don't know that much about her, and you get the time to get to know her before you learn about her amnesia and her past, so when you eventually do find out stuff, it is so cathartic because you're experiencing it alongside her, whereas with this version of a character, the moment she gets on screen, you're like, okay, yeah, I know what you are. You're the quirky character who's just kind of mess around and has a mysterious dark past. Literally, the first thing that you find her doing is going out of her way to discover about her past, and that takes away from the build-up that the original had. There's a lot more to be said about her, and we're just kind of glossing over it, but yeah, it's a poorly executed version of Faye Valentine, and I don't blame the actor. I think she did a good job with what she was given. It's very clear that she was not written or directed to be anything like the original Faye. It's a ruined version of a character. Now we're going to move on to talk about what I personally believe is the worst thing about this adaptation, and that is the vicious Julia Syndicate subplot. Cowboy Bebop, in his essence, is a episodic story about a ragtag group of bounty hunters who go through a whole host of differing experiences. The more you get to see them interact with each other and the way that they complete missions, the more you learn about them. And it's beautiful. It is fun. And it's irreverent, and it doesn't care if you're following or not. There are episodes that literally end with massive cliffhangers, and then they don't even resolve them in the next episode, because that's not what it's about. So again, creating an overarching narrative out of that was part of why an adaptation wasn't the worst idea in the first place. Take the essence of what made the show fun and turn it into something more streamlined. And obviously one of the biggest things with the Cowboy Bebop original show was the plot with Spike and Syndicate and his love of Julia and his rivalry with Vicious, and this takes that and just runs it into the ground and turns it into one of the most generic, boring, and uninteresting things I've ever seen. One of the biggest grievances I have with it is Julia as a character, because this subplot entirely revolves around her, and she's just not likable and not enjoyable. Maybe I am on my own in this, but I didn't care at all about her. They didn't seem to know what they wanted for her. At one side, she's this unfortunate victim to a horrible man in Vicious, her husband who controls her, and she's seeking for a way to escape from that. And then on the other hand, she's some sort of brilliant tactician mastermind who's kind of the shadowy figure behind the whole coup d'etat against the Syndicate. That's polarizing ideas, and I understand. Look, having her be the victim to her husband and wanting her to still come across as brave and courageous is totally possible, but I never felt like either of these worked for me, because I never believed her as a victim, because I saw that she is smart and she is plotting, but then I didn't believe her as this leader of the Syndicate and a plotting person, because I've seen her as too much of a victim who's trying to escape from her husband. What? There's no character here for me, and it could have worked maybe if Julia was just charismatic and likable, but she gave me nothing. She was just this person who had things happen to her and just did what everyone told her to, and then suddenly was trying to take agency in the story in a way that you had already told me she wasn't doing. I also had an issue with her romance with Spike. So I'm to believe that Spike was willing to give up and change his whole life, leave the Syndicate for a woman who he did a little bit of a dance with. And barely even that. Honestly, I think I've seen Sleepwalkers do as much intricate movements as that. And then, they boned and then they were in love. And I'm supposed to believe, from what's been shown to me, that that's a relationship which has haunted him for years afterwards. It looked so much more like a fling affair than this deep romantic relationship. I got no chemistry between the two. And that's the crux of that narrative. And I got nothing from it. And I'm sure that everyone else felt the same, because none of it worked. And now we're going to talk about spoilers, because that ending just kind of even uprooted and upended everything we'd already seen. So, Julia, spoiler alert, is now the villain of this show. I understand the desire to make her a bigger part, because yes, in the original, she was kind of just this ethereal character who was haunting for Spike and never really had any agency. I loved the idea of having her be a fully fleshed out character, but this just didn't work. As I've already said, I didn't buy her as a threat, and I also didn't buy her as a victim. I also didn't buy her as a love interest. Yeah, this subplot, it dragged because I just didn't care about Julia and this relationship. I was waiting for more adventuring, bounty hunting fun, and I just kept getting this plain, dull crime drama with a character centering around a character that I didn't care about. But one more thing that I want to talk about. Radical Edward, is one of the best things about Cowboy Bebop, the original show. And when everyone noticed that they weren't in the promotional material, it was concerning. One of the things that kept driving me to continue watching the show, even though I did not enjoy it, was the thought that, hey, Ed is going to turn up at some point. Ed is going to turn up at some point, because the creator of the show told us that people who were waiting for Ed were going to be delighted. Well, you lied, sir. You lied. Because, again, spoiler alert, Ed is just essentially a Marvel Cinematic Universe post-credit tease for a second season. A second season which, in my opinion, we're not going to get, or we shouldn't get. I mean, who knows? It's in the top 10 on Netflix at the moment. There's a good possibility we'll get more. But the thing that sucks the most about this is I can't be angry about it. They did deliver Radical Ed, but they didn't at the same time. It was a cop-out. It was an attempt to tease excitement for a second season, and that is a real perversion of the best thing about this show. Yeah, and you know, from what we saw, I think the actor looked like they were having fun. It was a little bit hokey and cartoonish, but I mean, that is Ed. I think I need to see more of that character before I can fully grasp whether they're being captured properly or not. It's just a sign. It's just a sign of what this show is. It's not a loving tribute to this fantastic series. It's just a Netflix show. It's just a Netflix show. It makes me terrified for One Piece and Gundam and Avatar: The Last Airbender. Oh god. Oh, they're gonna ruin Avatar again, aren't they? Again. I don't know if my heart can take that.
You promise to be good?
Of course I'll be good.
Seriously, please be good.
Am I normally not?
And at least Netflix have put the original series on their site, on their platform. I hope that people can go back and watch the original and see what made it good in the first place. I really do. But if this is your first time with Cowboy Bebop, I don't see why you would want to. There's nothing more to say. Thank you for watching. This is a rambly one. I didn't have a script for this because I was just so compelled to have to make something about how much I didn't like this show. I hope you agree with my points. If you don't, feel free to sound off in the comments, tell me that I'm wrong, or tell me why you personally liked the show or didn't like the show, because hey, if you liked the show, that's fine. Like, I don't agree with you, but you're allowed to like something I don't like. I'm not some sort of expert on the matter. So thank you for watching. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe. That's the big one. That's the big S. I'm going to go back and watch the original Cowboy Bebop just to cleanse my palate. Adieu, adieu, adieu to you and you and you. Peace.